civilian workers, sorry. She had debarked from Boston Army base late in January, en route to a military installation somewhere in Greenland. Once a luxury coastal liner, the 5,649-ton vessel had been converted into an Army transport ship. Dorchester, one of 3 ships in the convoy, designated Sierra Gulf 19, was moving steadily across the icy waters from Newfoundland. The convoy was escorted by 3 Coast Guard cutters, the Tampa, the Escobar, and the Comanche. Hans Danielson, the transport ship's captain, was concerned and cautious. Earlier, the Tampa had detected a submarine with its sonar. Danielson knew he was in dangerous water even before he got the alarming information. German U-boats were constantly prowling these vital sea lanes, known by seamen as Torpedo Alley, because several ships had already been blasted and sunk. The Dorchester was now only 150 miles from its destination, but the captain gave the order for the men to sleep in their clothing and keep their life jackets on, just in case. But many soldiers sleeping deep in the holds disregarded the order because of the tremendous heat of the engines. Others ignored it because the Mae West life vests were clumsy and hard and extremely uncomfortable to sleep in. At 12:55 a.m. on February 3rd, periscope broke the frigid Atlantic waters, and through the crosshairs, the captain of the German submarine U-223 spotted the Dorchester. After identifying and targeting the troop ship, he gave orders to fire torpedoes. The hit was decisive and deadly, striking the starboard side amidship and far below the waterline. Captain Danielson, alerted the Dorchester was taking water rapidly, beginning to sink, gave the order to abandon ship. But in less than 27 minutes, the Dorchester would slip beneath the Atlantic's icy water and disappear. Tragically, the hit had knocked out all power and radio contact with the 3 escort ships. This Coast Guard Tampa, however, had seen the flash of the explosion. It immediately responded and rescued 97 survivors. The Escobar slowed down and circled around the Dorchester, rescuing another additional 132 survivors. The 3rd Coast Guard cutter, Comanche, continued on its mission, escorting the remaining 2 ships in the convoy. On board the Dorchester, panic and chaos had set in. The blast had killed scores of men, and many more were seriously wounded. Others, stunned by the explosion, were groping in the darkness and trying to find their way up and out. Those sleeping without outer clothing rushed topside, where they were comforted first by a blast of icy Arctic air, and then by the sudden knowledge that death waited for those who were unprepared. Men jumped from the sinking ship into lifeboats, overcrowding them to the point of capsizing. According to eyewitnesses, other rafts tossed over the rail and into the Atlantic, drifted away before any soldiers could get into them. Those through the sorry about that. According to these present who survived, 4 Army chaplains stood and brought hope through the despair and light through the darkness. Those chaplains were Lieutenant George L. Fox, a Methodist minister, Lieutenant Alexander D. Good, a Jewish rabbi, Lieutenant John P. Washington, a Roman Catholic, and Lieutenant Clark Pooling, a Dutch Reformed minister. Quickly and quietly, the 4 chaplains spread out among the dazed and panicked soldiers. They tried to calm the frightened, tend to the wounded, and guide the confused and disoriented towards safety. Witnesses on that terrible night remember hearing the 4 men of God offering prayers for the dying and encouragement for those who would live. One witness, a young Army private, found himself floating in oil-fouled water, surrounded by dead bodies and debris. He could hear men crying, pleading, and praying, and he could hear the chaplains preaching courage. Their voices, he said, were the only thing that kept me going. A young soldier tried to go back down and re-enter his cabin, but he was stopped by Rabbi Good. The sailor, concerned about the cold Arctic air, explained he had forgotten his gloves. "Never mind," Good told him. "I have 2 pair. Here you go." And the rabbi gave the soldier his own gloves. Much later, the soldier realized that the rabbi didn't have 2 pair, but had decided he was not going to leave the ship and would not need them. By this time, most of the men were topside, and the chaplains opened a storage locker and began distributing life jackets. It was then that a ship engineer witnessed what to him was an astonishing sight. When there were no more life jackets in the storage space, the chaplains unhesitatingly removed their own and gave them to 4 frightened young soldiers. It was the finest thing I had ever seen and hoped to see this side of heaven, said another survivor who had also witnessed the soldiers' selfless act. Their response is understandable, since the altruistic action of the 4 chaplains constitutes one of the purest spiritual and ethical acts a human being could make. And when giving their life jackets away, Rabbi Good did not call out to another Jew. Father Washington did not call out for a Catholic, nor did the Reverends Fox and Pooling call for a Protestant. Each of them simply gave their life jackets to the next man in line. And as the stricken ship went down, survivors in nearby rafts last saw the 4 chaplains with their arms linked together, their bodies braced against the slanting deck, and their voices could be heard loud and clear, offering prayers to God for the souls of their fellow men in peril that night. Of the 902 men aboard the USS Dorcester, 672 died that dismal night, leaving only 230 survivors. When the terrible news reached the American shores, the nation was stunned by the magnitude of the tragedy and the heroic conduct of the 4 chaplains. After all, they were thought to be just ordinary men, but when the circumstances moved them, the 4 friends had committed an extraordinary act that bound them together forever. Now we'll have the biographies of each of the chaplains.